So before I get started, my name is Courtney Gus. I'm the Director of Training here at National Flood Services. I've been in the flood industry for about 10 years, and I've been in insurance for about 16 years now. I'm a licensed agent in the state of Ohio, and I previously worked for both captive and independent agencies as well as an insurance company. So I try to keep that in mind as we go through the information today, and hopefully this is relevant to you. So today's class is all about flood preparedness. What do we do before the storm hits? And so we're going to talk about some flood policy basics, go over some things you might need to know, and then how can we help our customers prepare their home or prepare their business before a storm. And then we're also going to talk about what to do afterwards, after the storm hits. So let's start with some flood policy basics. And if everybody could please mute their phones as well, that would be greatly appreciated. So ultimately, we start with what is a flood? Because the policy is not going to kick in unless we meet the definition of a flood. And it's water, the inundation of water on normally dry land that covers 2 or more acres or 2 or more properties. And this can be really confusing for people because they don't understand that it's not necessarily water sewer backup into their basement. It's really truly dry land that has standing or inundation of water that then enters the property or enters the structure. 2 or more properties is typically what we see when we're looking at flood policy or flood coverage kicking in. It's where the water literally crosses the property line, even if only one structure was damaged. So if the street outside my home overflows with heavy torrential downpour, and the water comes over the property line onto my property and damages my home, because it crossed that 2 or more property line and my structure was damaged, my policy would kick in. 2 or more acres is a little broader. It's 2 or more acres in the same general vicinity caused by the same flooding event. So when we've got standing water that covers that 2 or more acres in the same general vicinity, even if only one structure is damaged, the flood policy would kick in that point. It comes from both the overflow of inland or tidal waters, so something we'd normally see with storm surge and a hurricane like what we're watching now. But it can also be from the accumulation or runoff of surface water, so from a heavy rain or torrential downpour. But it can also be from any source. It doesn't have to be Mother Nature. So sometimes we see water main breaks or ruptures of above ground pools. So the water can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be Mother Nature. It can also be a man-made issue. And where can property owners obtain flood coverage? This is a question we get often. And the NFIP and FEMA do study after study, and we're still facing some myths around how flood coverage works. There's still a lot of property owners who assume that flood is a covered peril on their standard market insurance policy, whether it be a homeowner policy or a commercial business policy. And those of us in the insurance world know that unfortunately flood is actually an excluded peril on most standard insurance policies. You can obtain flood insurance coverage through the National Flood Insurance Program. That's probably the most widely accepted. If we could have everybody mute their phones, that would be appreciated. Thank you so much. The NFIP, or the National Flood Insurance Program, is the most widely accepted and the most widely known in terms of places to obtain flood insurance coverage. There are some advantages to working with the NFIP. It's available in all 50 states. It's available for most properties as long as they're in a eligible participating community. Coverage and quoting is standard across the board. So whether you're quoting a policy in Florida or in Ohio, the policy quote process is almost identical. There's no application required at renewal, which is also nice too. You may have also heard about the emergence of the private flood insurance market, and those are typically offered through excess and surplus lines markets. The eligibility varies by location. Availability also varies by location. There are a lot of places where it's deemed incredibly high risk and those markets aren't interested in writing there. Applications are typically required for new business and renewal, just like any other standard E&S markets, and the prices or premium can vary dramatically. So it's a little different world there, but sometimes if your customer's in a non-participating community and they can't have access to an NFIP policy, that may be your only option. You do sometimes also see endorsements to standard market insurance policies that cover flood. I was previously a commercial underwriter in my past life, and we would occasionally endorse flood onto a commercial policy. They ran a lot of risk meters and things in the background, and it was deemed to be ultra low risk in order for us to endorse on our own paper. So it's not something you see often, but you do come across it from time to time. And then another place is excess coverage. So if you obtain a national flood insurance policy for underlying coverage, we do know those do have standard cap limits. Don't forget to talk to your customers about excess coverage, because oftentimes for high value homes or large commercial properties, the NFIP policy coverage limits don't always work. We have a quick flood quiz we're going to launch here just to get us started and have a little bit of fun today. So Carrie is going to launch that quiz for us. And if you could just we'll give it about a minute and see if you guys can answer these for us. I'm not going to lie, Carrie made this quiz a little tough today.
These are all pretty good facts.
She's going to test your knowledge. All right, we need about 10 more seconds. Good job, everyone. You absolutely should not drive through floodwater. We're going to talk a little bit about flash floods in a bit, but it's oftentimes we don't know how deep the water is, and there's damage to the road or surface underneath, and so it can be incredibly dangerous. We also know that if there's a flash flood warning, which we'll talk about, it's important not to be out in your car if possible, because the water can come on very, very quickly, and oftentimes people become trapped in that situation. All right. Another flood fact or common misconception: if I'm in a low risk flood zone, I don't need a flood insurance policy. And statistics have shown between 2014 and 2018 alone, 40% of all flood claims originated in those low to moderate risk flood zones. So we've had a lot of large storms over the last 6 years, and we've had a large percentage of those were in low risk flood zones. So Hurricane Harvey in Houston was an example of that, where a large percentage of the claims actually came from what we would consider a low risk flood zone. So it's important to talk to everybody about flood coverage, not just those that are mandated by the bank to carry flood coverage, because they're what we consider a high risk flood zone. So some things to know. Anytime you're dealing with a flood or an oncoming storm, the safety is absolutely the #1 piece. We had our claims expert on a couple of weeks ago, Andy Flanagan, talking about Claims 101, and safety is absolutely our #1 concern when it comes to flood. We on the flood end see a lot of things that unfortunately people are severely hurt or injured, displaced, and it's just not a good situation to be in. So if an evacuation order is issued, obviously evacuate when required. That's absolutely the #1. We want to avoid being trapped in rapidly rising floodwaters. We want to seek protection, seek higher ground, and we're going to talk a little bit about planning for those kinds of things. Here's some definitions on flood watch versus flood warning, and flash flood watch versus flash flood warning. Say that 5 times fast, because people are often confused between what the watch and warning mean. And ultimately, the flood watch means that we're watching possible flooding in the area due to either previous rains or what we know about an oncoming storm, that we know that flooding is possible. The ground may already be saturated and wet, and this storm could be kind of the straw on the camel's back in terms of that last piece to create a flooding event. Flood warning means that the flooding is already occurring. We're seeing it rapidly rise, and you want to make sure you evacuate or seek higher ground immediately. Same with a flash flood watch or warning. This just means that the waters come on incredibly rapidly, there wasn't a lot of warning, and you need to seek higher ground immediately. And there's also important things to remember on the flood coverage as well. So we now understand what causes the flood or the warnings around flooding. We also talk about obtaining flood insurance coverage and when it's necessary, but it's also important to know the differences on flood coverage. And that can also be a common misconception when we're working with flood insurance. You know, when we're talking about flood insurance, coverage is often paid out ACV, unless it's your primary residence and you need a co-insurance requirement. So make sure you're talking to customers about that. All the research and everything we know about preparing for a flood, having a flood policy is first and foremost, and then second to that is understanding your coverage. So it's important to know what you got going into a situation like this. It's also important to note that coverage for building and contents differ from standard market insurance policies. So something that might be covered as a building coverage, coverage A item, on a standard market home insurance policy may be covered as a coverage B, contents item on a flood insurance policy. And oftentimes customers don't carry contents coverage. So it's important to understand the coverage and what you have and don't have prior to a flooding event. Coverage is also limited to program max limits. So it's important to talk about excess coverage in those instances as well. We're going to get into preparing your home for a flood. Oops, sorry guys. And FEMA actually has a really great video out there on this. It takes about 1 minute and 20 seconds to watch. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started here.
When the clouds form, the rain pours, and water is all around, you'll ask yourself, how prepared or unprepared are you?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
When the clouds form, the rain pours, and water is all around, you'll ask yourself, how prepared or unprepared are you? Did you raise your utilities, appliances and such? Install a sump pump, clean the drains, just in case it decides to rain. Do you know your risks? Have you checked the local plans? You should cover your property with a flood insurance policy. Is your emergency supply kit packed? Is your family prepared? Do they know what to do, where to go, and how to stay safe? Because when the water starts to rise, you must act quickly and be wise. Turn on your radio, listen for updates, and if authorities tell you to go, hurry up and do so. Get to safe ground, go as high as you can, do what you need to do, but don't put yourself in harm's way. Just inches of water can sweep you away. Once the water is gone, move carefully. Be on the lookout for dangers you can't see, animals, debris, and electricity. Do not go home until you hear the all clear. Now when you get home, be aware. Not everything is as safe as it may appear. So before the clouds form, the rain pours, and water is all around, get prepared, make a plan, and keep yourself dry. Get started today. Go to ready.gov/prepare.
All right, thank you all for watching that with us. Actually, we were doing a lot of research on preparedness and working with our guest speaker, Kathy, on that. We thought that video was great. FEMA does a nice job on helping consumers prepare for disaster events. Flooding is just one of them, forest fires and tornadoes are another. So we're going to go through a lot of materials in the next few slides, and we're going to reference those materials at the end on where you can find them. But from an agent perspective, not only can we be a source of knowledge and a resource for our customers, but it's also a great sales and marketing tool going into this season. So utilize some of this information for social media or email outreach as well. And if you have any questions, let us know. We're going to go ahead and get started on this. So there were some basics when we were talking about preparing your home for a flood. And I live up here in the Midwest where everybody has a basement. Of course, we have to hibernate half the year, right? Because it's cold. But there are some things around basement preparedness that customers can know. And the first one obviously is installing a sump pump and making sure that it has backup power, because oftentimes you may not have backup into your basement initially, but if the power goes out and the rains continue, that's when we start to see issues. Some things that were interesting: elevate electrical outlets or electronics or machinery like we saw in the video. And also you can look to install backflow valves for drains and sewer connections. And there was a lot of very detailed information available out there for consumers that were interested in making changes like that. I know we all have customers that live in areas where they see this kind of flooding issue on a regular basis, and they're always looking for ways to improve or change their home to prevent damage. And there's some really great resources out there. Elevate your belongings. So get them up into airtight, Rubbermaid type containers, get them off the ground onto shelving, or get them out of the basement completely. And then prepare a plan in the event of a flood. There's also some things you can do on your way out the door. Disconnect electronics and appliances if possible, and turn off electrical power and gas at the main lines. You saw in the video, after the water recedes, or even while the water is still standing after a flooding event, oftentimes that water can be charged with electricity because of everything being plugged in or down power lines. So it's important, if you can remember, if you have the time, to shut those things off. There's some more things as a consumer you can do to plan and prepare. And the first obviously is understanding your risk. We have a great tool on our website where you can actually run your own risk assessment for your address, but it's important to talk to our customers about their risk and what they may be facing in their area. They could be in a floodway or a high-risk flood zone, or it could be just a low-risk flood zone that tends to see a lot of flooding over time. Obtain flood coverage. Talk about reviewing those coverages. Make sure you understand what the policy does cover and does not cover, and make sure that we've got appropriate limits or excess coverage when applicable. And then ultimately create a plan and practice that plan with your family. Just like a fire escape or tornado planning, you want to make sure that you've got that plan ready and your family understands what to do. Keep lines of communication open. Oftentimes after a storm, infrastructure is damaged, so have alternative methods prepared. Also have important documents handy. They'll often remind you to put those documents in a toteable, airtight container, a small Rubbermaid container that you can take with you, passports, identification, important paperwork documents. They also recommend, if it's anything electronic, storing it off-site, maybe with a family member or someone you trust so that you have a backup available. Prepare for what you'll do with your pets in the case of an evacuation. Oftentimes, if you have to evacuate quickly, people don't plan for what they're going to do with their pets, and we see them left behind, unfortunately. And then obviously have an emergency supply kit prepared. So it's just like any other emergency supply kit. This would work for every kind of disaster you have. But think about things like clothing and blankets, a weather radio. Make sure you've got chargers, drinking water, non-perishable foods, and first aid kits. Again, there are some great online checklists and planning materials that we'll provide to you guys after the class that you can share with your customers. But it's definitely something homeowners and property owners can be talking about ahead of the event. And the same goes for preparing your business. I know some of us just write personal lines or some of us just write commercial lines, but ultimately business owners and homeowners are in the same boat when they're preparing for a flood. So we want to talk about the flood policy and making sure they have that in place and understanding the coverages. Building coverage and contents coverage on the commercial side are paid out at actual cash value, ACV, all day, every day, regardless of how much coverage they carry. So it's important they understand that ahead of time. And also making sure that they have contents coverage for any inventory or material they have in the building. Make sure they understand the risk in their area. They can store inventory and material up off the ground in watertight containers. Keep backup copies of important documents, offsite servers, disaster recovery plans, anything that we've all worked on from our corporate level, they would want to look at too from a small business level. And there are resources to help small businesses with things like that. Make sure that they have an emergency plan and kit as well, and inform employees of the plan and practice. Oftentimes business owners aren't at the location when an event happens. We want to make sure that everyone involved is safe and understands what to do. Talk about flood mitigation materials as well. There are some materials as a small business owner you can keep on hand, like wood boards or inflatable sandbags. There are thousands of really incredible flood mitigation products on the market, and depending on where your customer is located, it may be beneficial for them to look into things like that. And then most importantly, prepare some kind of a business continuity plan. You'll see the statistics over to the right-hand side. 40% of small businesses don't reopen after a flooding event. And 1 year later, 25% still remain closed. And oftentimes, businesses don't have a backup plan for how they're going to operate remotely. I guess COVID in that regard has been a great way for a lot of businesses to test how that would work. So the same business continuity plan they may have put in place for COVID and the current situation and having to work remotely may also work after a flooding event. That's something that business owners should plan for and be prepared for if they're planning on trying to remain open in some capacity. And then what do we do after a flood? You know, oftentimes a community may not allow a property owner back right away. It's unsafe, it's unsanitary, so they have to wait until the all clear has been given. The important thing to do is file a claim as quickly as possible. There's multiple ways to file. You can call, you can email, talk to your agent. There's even some online options available. So make sure you get that claim filed as quickly as possible. Normally an adjuster will reach out within 24 to 48 hours. The water does have to recede before they can come out to the property, but it's important to get that conversation started and understand what the next steps are for a property owner as they're waiting for the adjuster to get out there. Try to mitigate further flood damage if possible, maybe open windows or turn on fans, try to dry things out to prevent mold. Keep a record of all your damaged belongings. Don't throw anything away until you've documented it, taken a photo of it. There's some kind of record that it existed, because we want to make sure you're paid out for everything that was damaged if possible. And I say here again, take photos. And you'll see on the right, FEMA tells you to take photos. Take tons of pictures with your cell phone, whatever you can, so that we can document exactly what the damage was in your property and further that claim as quickly as possible. And then be careful. Floodwaters can be pretty gross. Unfortunately, they're going to pick up any debris, roadside material, anything that's in the sewers, and they're going to dump it in your property. So you want to make sure that you safely discard of anything that needs to be, and you take care of yourself with protective gear. And don't do anything if you're unsure of what's going on. Just make sure you call your adjuster or you give the claims department a call, and they can walk you through anything that you have questions on. Flood claims can also be a little bit of a slower process than a traditional standard market insurance claim. The average flood claim can take a couple of weeks. It's not the adjuster just showing up with a checkbook. So you want to make sure too that we're setting the proper expectations when we're talking to customers about the process, and that they're going to be highly involved with the claims process as well. Oftentimes our customers are displaced in events like this, so we want to make sure that they understand what the next steps are. We've got proper contact information, and we make it as seamless for them as possible. And unfortunately, since Kathy Howington's not here today, that was very, very quick. But we definitely want to get some feedback on preparedness. Does anybody have any questions or any experience going through an event like this, or tips that worked for them that they would mind sharing with the group? Today's hour session turned into 30 minutes.
I have a comment.
Absolutely.
So actually, it's funny that this all comes up. I live in a small town called Carnation that's out here in Washington State, and we actually have a flood warning test alarm, which I'll mute in a second because it's about to go off. It goes off every Wednesday at noon. And last Tuesday, the alarm went off and told us the dam had failed and to evacuate immediately. And it took 40 minutes for them to get word to people that it was a false alarm. And a lot of people, we just had a city council meeting where they had to go over what went wrong because they were doing maintenance and they set off the alarm that had failed. So it was a big eye opener to a lot of us how unprepared most people actually were for that to happen. Because I mean, there's people that have lived here for 35 years and that's never happened. And the amount of people that didn't have emergency kits, some people that have moved here recently had no idea where evacuation routes were, where to go, anything like that. So it's, you know, I mean, looking at all this, I'm thinking, yep. Like nobody knew what to do. Nobody had, you know, ideas, hadn't prepared anything. So it's good information definitely to pass along because we live in a flood town and we didn't know what to do.
That's incredible. That must have been so scary for everyone.
Oh,
and
it was terrifying.
Evacuation routes is a really good point as well. Know your local evacuation routes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell you, I wouldn't know mine either. So
yeah,
that's really important. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm really glad it was a false alarm.
Yeah, me too.
Hopefully that doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any experience or any important tips they'd like to share that was really interesting?
Or even a story. I love, just like how Heather mentioned, I love hearing someone's experience or something that they've gone through or they know a friend has gone through, just to help prepare and give someone else some knowledge.
I can hop in. So my family lives down in Florida, my brother and sister-in-law, and they lived through Irma a couple of years ago, and they don't normally evacuate. They always wait it out, which they've learned the last couple times is not a smart decision. So they decided to evacuate for Irma, and they were going to drive from Fort Myers, Florida, up to Columbus, Ohio, because we're the nearest family for them to stay with. They have 2 giant dogs and a small car, and it took them 29 hours to get from Fort Myers, Florida to Atlanta, Georgia, which should normally take about 8, 10. Because of the evacuation traffic. They also couldn't find a hotel until north of Tennessee. So that's another important thing to think of is on your evacuation route or plan, how you're going to handle situations like that, because it was really rough with the dogs. They couldn't find anywhere to stay. It took hours for them to find food or a place to sleep. So that's something to think about too when you've got mass evacuations, is just how many people hit the road at the exact same time. Well, we've got a rather quiet group today. I can't thank Heather enough for sharing her piece. I'm going to go ahead and we've actually created kind of a feedback poll. We're trying to get some feedback from all of you as we continue to prepare this material. We are going to have Kathy back at a later date. She's been working on first notice of lost claims from the current hurricane, unfortunately, and she is just buried. So if you guys wouldn't mind providing a little bit of feedback on the poll that just popped up, and then the next slide, I've got 2 more slides for you, and then we will let you go for the day.
If anybody's interested in hearing what an actual flood alarm sounds like, it's about, listen.
Sounds like our tornado alarms up here, Heather.
Heather, how far are you away from that alarm?
My dogs also greatly enjoy it.
That's so funny. Mine howls too. Carrie had asked, I don't know if you heard her, how far, are you close to the alarm siren?
The alarm siren is in a park just on the other side of my neighborhood, so I'm super close to it.
All right, we will give this poll a couple more seconds. I'll put the resources up while Carrie closes that up. I will be sending this out to everyone today so that you have the information. Oh, I'm so glad you found the material easy. So that everyone has the resources on how to share flood preparedness kits and plans with your customers for both homeowners and business owners. I wanted to share where I found the infographics and helpful tips. Our claim information is there, as well as our email address to our team, to the training and development team. So again, I'll be sending all this information out to you today. And last but not least, we have a couple of events coming up that I wanted to share with you guys before I let you go for the day. The week of August 17th, we are going to have a Test Your Knowledge Flood Game Show Week. Multiple games throughout the week. We'll have leaderboards and prizes, and we're going to be sending out information to all of you on how that will work and how you can participate, so keep an eye out on that. And the last 2 weeks of August, first week of September, we're going to have 20 plus local floodplain or state floodplain managers and associations on calls with us for state-specific risk information. So for instance, the Floodplain Management Association for the state of Florida will be on to talk about the changing risk in Florida. Same with New York, Texas, Louisiana, California. We've got so many states. It's going to be 2 sessions today, half-hour sessions for each state, plus question and answer session. So if there's a state that you're interested in hearing from, please let us know. If there is a state you're interested in signing up for, check out our website here in the next few days or so for those times and class information, because we're just finalizing those with all the floodplain managers. And with that, I thank you guys for hanging on with me, even though I wasn't Kathy Howington, the expert you were looking for today. Thank you for all the participation and additional information, and keep an eye out for the resources and guides as we send them out today. And I'm going to give you guys 25 minutes back on your day today, so thank you so much. Have a great day.